It all started when I went to visit my mum for the first time in years. We weren't close, not after everything that happened, but when I got the call, her voice breaking, asking me to come home, I felt a pang of guilt. I hadn't seen her in over 3 years. So I packed my bags, drove the long stretch of highway, and finally arrived at the house where I grew up. The place was older than I remembered, darkened with age, and the lawn hadn't been kept up. A few shutters were hanging loose and the door creaked when I opened it. I stepped inside and the smell hit me. Mildew, dust, and something else I couldn't place. "Mum," I called out, but there was no response. I found her in the living room, sitting in a rocking chair. Her eyes were vacant, almost like she hadn't been fully aware of my presence. She looked fragile, smaller than I remembered, her hair thinner, her skin pale. But when she looked up, her face twisted with a strange recognition. "You've come back," she whispered. There was something about her tone that sent a cold chill down my spine. "Of course, Mom, I'm here. What happened? Why did you call me?" I asked, walking toward her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at the doorway, her eyes darting as though something was watching her. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. Then her lips trembled as she said, "They've been here, watching." "Who, Mum?" I asked, crouching in front of her, trying to catch her attention. She stared at me, but it was like she wasn't really seeing me. Her hand reached out, trembling, and touched my cheek, her nails cold against my skin. "They were in the house. I don't know who they are, but they're not human, not anymore." She shivered, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I thought I could keep them away, but I couldn't." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. I thought it was just her mind, fractured by age or something more sinister, but deep down I felt a twinge of unease. I sat with her for hours, trying to talk her into explaining more, but she only repeated the same cryptic phrases. Then, just before midnight, she finally whispered something that made my blood run cold. "They know you're here now. They'll come for you." I tried to laugh it off. It wasn't like her to say things like that. She'd always been a bit of a worrier, but this felt different, like it wasn't her speaking at all. Around 2 a.m, I decided I needed some sleep. The house creaked as I made my way upstairs. The floorboards groaned under my weight, the hallway light flickered and buzzed as I passed by rooms I hadn't seen in years. I didn't remember the old family portraits hanging on the walls. I stopped in front of one, studying the faces. There was a woman, my grandmother, I assumed, and behind her, standing in the shadows, was a figure I didn't recognise. It was tall, hunched, its features blurred, like something was deliberately obscuring its face. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at it. Something wasn't right. I hurried to my old room, hoping sleep would take the edge off the creeping dread, but as I lay in bed, I felt the weight of something oppressive pressing down on me. Every creak, every whisper of the wind felt like it was coming from somewhere inside the house. I rolled over, trying to ignore the feeling, but then the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. I froze. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but then the footsteps grew louder, closer. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. The steps were slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I got up cautiously, slipping out of bed, my feet padding across the cold hardwood floor. The steps stopped just outside my door. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then I heard a voice, software like a whisper in the dark. "Come out, dear, we've been waiting for you." I nearly screamed. The voice wasn't my mother's, nor was it human. It was layered, like multiple voices overlapping each other, distorted and unrecognisable. I crept toward the door, my heart hammering, and slowly I opened it a crack. There was nothing there. I sighed with relief, but as I stepped into the hallway, I felt an overwhelming chill. A shadow at the end of the corridor shifted. I couldn't make it out, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Before I could react, I heard a loud thud from downstairs, followed by a crash. It was my mother's voice screaming. I bolted down the stairs, my legs shaky with terror. When I reached the living room, I found her standing in the middle of the room, her hands raised as if warding off something invisible. Her voice cracked, and she shouted, "Don't let them take you." Then I saw it, a figure tall and thin emerging from the shadows in the corner of the room. Its long, spindly limbs moved unnaturally, its face hidden in the dark. It was smiling, at least I thought it was. Its mouth stretched too wide, impossibly so, like a grotesque mask, and in its eyes there was only darkness. I ran to her, trying to pull her away, but my body froze. It felt like my feet were glued to the floor, unable to move. The figure began to step toward us, and I could hear a low, guttural growl emanating from it. In a panic, I screamed at her, "Mum, what is it? What do I do?" Her eyes were wide with terror as she whispered one last time, "They never leave. They wait until you join them." Suddenly the room grew unbearably cold. The figure was closer now, its limbs unnaturally long. I reached for my mum, but she seemed to dissolve before my eyes. She wasn't there anymore, just a faint, shadowy outline drifting into the thing in front of me. It reached for me, and I felt something cold, like fingers made of ice, brush against my skin. A voice, faint but clear, whispered in my ear, "Your turn." I screamed, but no sound came out. Everything went black.